Welcome to the Imam Abdullah Haron Memorial Lecture presented by the Imam Haron Foundation. Assalamu alaikum, good evening, and molweni. We also welcome the listeners of Radio 76. Radio 76 is the official community radio broadcaster for the Imam Haron Memorial Lecture. And so thank you for joining us, listeners of Radio 76, and those of you who have joined us via Zoom. And at this stage, I just want to mention there is a Q&A session that follows after the two addresses. So do pop in your questions. We will handle them as soon as the speakers have delivered their addresses. So thank you so much again for joining us. And we say Assalamu alaikum, molweni, good evening. And we thank the Academia Al-Ikhlas Library for facilitating this webinar. Dr. Ilyas Parker in particular, chairperson of the library, is in fact placed on record the library's full support for the work of the Imam Abdullah Haron Foundation, and he deems it a privilege to be associated with tonight's memorial lecture. It's really in keeping with what Imam Abdullah Haron has been his spirit is indeed alive in the work that the library does. And our guests tonight, I welcome them, advocate/judge Dumisa Ntsebeza and Lukhanyo Calata. And more about them when I introduce them. I'll greet them formally. They'll greet you formally when they present their address. Now today, the 27th of September, marks the 52nd commemoration of the killing in detention of Imam Abdullah Haron. Now, to set the scene, we'll now view a brief clip which gives us some background to the killing of the Imam.
This Imam was an anti-racism campaigner in apartheid South Africa, and he paid for it with his life. It was the morning of September 27, 1969. Imam Abdullah Haron had been in solitary confinement for 123 days at the notorious Caledon Square police station of the apartheid regime. The first religious leader to be killed in custody, his death sparked international protests and tributes. So why was this Imam seen as such a threat to the regime? A trailblazing activist and much-loved religious leader among both Muslims and non-Muslims, who lovingly referred to him as Mfundisi, or priest. Imam Haron had been under surveillance since returning from Mecca, where he performed pilgrimage before travelling to Egypt and the UK to spread the word about the increasing racist persecution of the apartheid regime. He made contact with the World Islamic Council, representatives of Arab countries, and anti-apartheid political exiles. He lobbied for anti-apartheid organisations that had been banned in South Africa, and he collected money from the Defence and Aid Fund for victims of apartheid and distributed it on his return to South Africa. The Imam's actions were considered terrorism and made him a target of the apartheid regime, who arrested him after his return. Imam Haron, who used his position in the community as a religious leader to struggle against apartheid for 13 years, became very popular and respected soon after his appointment. He consistently spoke out against the racist policies of apartheid, which he considered to be the obligation of a committed Muslim. Hailing from the Cape's mainly mixed-race Muslim community, the Imam tried to raise Muslim consciousness about the injustices of apartheid and its brutal racist laws, which black South Africans bore the brunt of. He supported victims of the system and liberation movements alike, collecting money for them, organising shelter, and offering messenger service in the country and abroad. In 1958, he founded the Claremont Muslim Youth Association, a progressive youth movement. Imam Haron gave a number of speeches and sermons against apartheid policies and laws, including a speech at the Cape Town Drill Hall in 1961, where he described the Group Areas Act as inhumane, barbaric, and un-Islamic. In cooperation with 8 individuals and 4 Muslim organizations, he launched a circular entitled Call of Islam. The publication aimed to voice protests against the implementation of the Group Areas Act and other racist laws. We can no longer tolerate further encroachment on these, our basic rights, and therefore we stand firm with our brothers in fighting the evil monster that is about to devour us, that is, oppression, tyranny, and baskap. Therefore, we hereby declare for everyone to know that we solemnly pledge ourselves to fight against all the injustices on the basis as ordained by Almighty Allah. During a time of increasing racist persecution and repression, the Imam's struggle was revolutionary, as many in Cape's Muslim community were afraid of the repercussions of speaking out. During the 50s and 60s, many in the community, including religious leaders, remained silent, and the idea of making hijrah instead of taking on the regime was common. But this could not have been further from Imam Haron's approach, who once said that despite having a revolutionary Prophet ﷺ, Muslims were still asleep. Both in his life and following his death, Imam Haron started a movement that would go on to act as an inspiration in the Cape Muslim struggle against apartheid in South Africa for decades.
And that was a bit of a background to the life and struggle of Shaheed Imam Abdullah Haron. Now, by way of introduction, there's just some notes and comments on behalf of the Imam Abdullah Haron Foundation that we want to just share with you. In August 1971, the Reverend Bernie Rankmore fasted 67 days at the shrine on Cape Town Signal Hill, demanding that an inquest be held into the killing of Imam Haron. Now, we salute Reverend Rankmore for transcending the racial and religious barriers when apartheid thrived on keeping us apart. His name is forever attached to Imam Haron, whom incidentally he never met. Now, next month, another important milestone, the 27th of October, marks the 50th commemoration of the death in detention of Ahmed Timol. Now, just over 3 weeks ago, apartheid-era security police officer Gao Rodriguez, who was charged with the murder of Ahmed Timol, died soon after being discharged from hospital. Imtiaz Kazi worked relentlessly to track down those responsible for the murder of his uncle and inspired other families to pursue justice for the murder of their families. The Imam Haron Foundation joins the apartheid-era victims support group in expressing gratitude towards Imtiaz Kazi for his support to the Haron family and many other families in the quest for justice. We note with great disappointment that his efforts to have Gao Rodriguez face the law for his involvement in the death of Ahmed Timol will now not happen. We believe that the NPA and the justice system must be held responsible for the delays, and at the very least, they owe Imtiaz a public apology. Now, this apology is best served by prosecuting Seth Sons and Neville Els, and this prosecution should happen without delay. These were the other security police members that must account for the actions in the killing of Ahmed Timol. We will join Imtiaz Kazi and the rest of the family of Ahmed Timol in October to commemorate 50 years since his passing. A new generation has come to learn about Ahmed Timol because of the efforts of Imtiaz Kazi. We salute you, Imtiaz. Long live the spirit of Ahmed Timol. Now, 2 weeks ago, Afri Forum released a video in response to the National Prosecuting Authority, the NPA's statement, that it will now pursue apartheid-era crimes that were referred to it by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, the video claims that the ANC was equally guilty of crimes and that there should be equality before the law. Now, the Imam Haron Foundation and the Apartheid-era Victims Family Group has noted both the substance and the tone of the statements of the Afri Forum CEO, Kali Kriel. Now, he's putting forward the idea that the atrocities be left in the past. Afri Forum holds the view that there was some moral equivalence between the legitimate struggle of the oppressed people and the racist regime. Now, the racist policies of the apartheid government and its execution by its security forces These were declared a crime against humanity. AfriForum, who want us to believe that this crime had no criminals, yet they treated our leaders and our communities as criminals. Now, AfriForum is calling for equality before the law. Where was the equality before the law when our leaders were detained and killed in detention? The tone of the AfriForum's statement is filled with what we knew as Baskap. When Kriel boldly says that if you don't listen to us, we'll call Gerrie Nel and privately prosecute you. 27 years after the demise of apartheid, these beneficiaries of apartheid's policy still want to make threats and bully officials of the democratic institutions that so many have sacrificed for, that Imam Haron has given his life for. But this is not a free pass for the NPA either. Our message is that you, the NPA, have wasted too much time. Perpetrators that could be held accountable are dying, and in fact, the timing of their deaths is certainly suspicious. The Imam Haron Foundation asserts that the NPA must proceed swiftly with the best of experts and move decisively on any blockages in the system, such as delays caused by information being classified. The foundation also encourages investigators and prosecutors to keep family members informed and utilize their vast knowledge and expertise in these matters. So now, with that statement from the Imam Haron Foundation, we move on to our first speaker, Lukhanyo Calata. He's the son of Fort Calata, who was killed by the apartheid security forces alongside Matthew Goniwe, Sparrow Mkonto, and Sikelo Mashluuli in June 1985. The four anti-apartheid activists became known as the Cradock Four. Lukhanyo, now an award-winning journalist and author, has spent the best part of his life either raising awareness about the Cradock Four or pursuing justice for his father and his comrades. The order to kill the Cradock Four was taken by the State Security Council, the SSC, which recommended that they be, and I quote, permanently removed from society, unquote. And the apartheid regime's last president, F.W. de Klerk, he was a minister at that time, was present at the State Security Council meeting, which issued the order to murder the Cradock Four. So hence the theme of our memorial lecture tonight. F.W. de Klerk is the amnesty for him. So now I invite Lukhanyo to address us. Thank you, Lukhanyo.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Syed. Good evening, and I pray that you all are well today. Please allow me to start by sending my family's heartfelt condolences to the Haron family. I want them to know that on this day, my family joins millions of others across the breadth of our country, our continent, and the world as we carry each and every one of them in our hearts and in our prayers. We ask the Almighty to continue to comfort them and to give them strength. I also want to express my deepest gratitude to the Imam Haron Foundation for the honor that they've bestowed upon me to make a few remarks during this auspicious occasion that commemorates one of our land's greatest sons. How I wish I could have met Imam Abdullah Haron, a man who by all accounts embodied the best of humanity. He was a husband, he was a father, a man of deep faith, a man who could inspire all who met with him. He was a man whose sermons invoke such passion, even decades after he had committed them to paper. Imam Haron was clearly a man who would not allow things such as skin color, social status, culture, or even religion to keep him from loving his neighbor as he loved himself and his family. How I wish I could have met Imam Abdullah Haron. It's clear to me that his love for us, his people, was only matched by his bravery. You see, Imam Haron lived in an era where the apartheid government saw nothing wrong with shooting and killing 69 innocent souls from Sharpeville, just outside Johannesburg, or 35 other innocent people from Kwalanga, just up the road from where we are all gathered in Cape Town. Remember those people who had marched on the 21st and on the 30th of March 1960 had wanted nothing more than to be recognized as human beings worthy of full citizenship on their own land. Despite these atrocities, which the Imam would have known of firsthand, his love for us, the oppressed people of our nation, dictated that Imam Abdullah Haron cast aside his fears, that he casts out his fears for his own well-being, to bravely speak truth to power. And that he did repeatedly for us. Now, according to the foundation's website, this is how Imam responded in part to the Group Areas Act at a meeting on the 7th of May, 1961, that was held at the Cape Drill Hall. Now, in his emotionally charged speech on that day, the Imam described the Group Areas Act as, quote, inhuman, barbaric, and un-Islamic, end quote. He added, I shall quote again, these laws were a complete negation on the fundamental principles of Islam. They are designed to cripple us educationally, politically, and economically. We cannot accept this type of enslavement, end quote. I will say it again. How I wish I could have met Imam Abdullah Haron. Are we surprised then that a man so confident in who he was and what he believed in would be considered a threat to successive and illegitimate apartheid governments? So afraid were the authors of apartheid of this single cleric that on the 28th of May, 1969, they detained him. They kept him locked away in a cellar for 123 days. 4 months, in other words. In that period, they brought unspeakable pain and suffering on his body and on his being. Imam Abdullah Haron eventually succumbed on the 27th of September. He was just 45 years old. Now, 52 years later, the Imam's legacy, though, is stronger than ever. It is Imam Haron's bravery that inspires our fight today for justice for my father, Fort Calata, and his comrades, Matthew Gonewe, Usparom Kond, Nostrelom Mhlaule. It is the Imam's love for us that inspires our fight for justice for Ahmed Timor, for Bantu Stephen Biko, for Colleen Williams and Robbie Waterwich, for Ashley Krill, for Anton Franch, for Noktula Simelane, for Victoria Mklenge, for Mapetla Mohapi, and for hundreds and hundreds of other young, brave men and women who laid down their lives for our freedom. It is the Imam's sacrifice for us that drives us to demand that this government of the ANC not cower to intimidation and threats by former President F.W. de Klerk, but that they charge and prosecute him and all other apartheid criminals for the crimes that they committed against our humanity. We call on the National Director of Public Prosecutions, Shamila Batoyi, to prosecute de Klerk with immediate effect. The recent death of João Rodrigues, who was implicated in the murder of Timor, should set alarm bells ringing in the National Prosecuting Authority. The longer we delay prosecuting these murderers, the more of them will die and take the truth about the murders of our loved ones to the grave. And that we will not accept. We will not accept. There should never be amnesty for murder, not even when there's full disclosure. And we know that in the murders of the Cradock Four, the Klerk's hands are dripping with their blood. He and all those who conspire to commit this heinous crime should not be allowed to continue to live as free and innocent men among us. For how can a crime against our humanity be committed? Yet we don't have a single criminal held to account for the kidnappings, the torture, the maimings, the mysterious disappearances, the deaths in detention, and the murders of our people at the hands of successive apartheid governments. Now, those within the ANC who entered into illegal deals for these criminals not to be prosecuted, they did so without our permission. They did so without our mandate. They too must be exposed for selling out the blood of our martyrs. Those within the ANC that entered into deals with the National Party, as exposed by F.W. de Klerk, they must be exposed for selling out the blood of our martyrs. Now, while those who took the Imam away from his wife, Khalima, may she rest in peace, and their three children, Shamila, Muhammad, and Fatima, may be long gone, we owe it to the Imam to ensure that where possible, those linked to successive apartheid governments who oversaw the killing and brutalizing of our people are charged, prosecuted, and convicted for the crimes. For this is the least that we can do to honor the proud legacy of Imam Abdullah Haron, a true revolutionary and hero of our struggle against apartheid. I pray that the spirit of Imam Haron continues to guide our struggle for justice, and that we never forget the price that he paid for our liberty. I'd like the Imam's family to know that it is on the giant shoulders of their father, of their brother, of their uncle, of their grandfather, that we will build our house of freedom. Aluta, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much to Lukhanyo Calata for that address. Very stirring, very passionate, and indeed, I think there are many who would have, who desire what you desire, Lukhanyo, and to have spent some time with Imam Abdullah Haron. But we are fortunate through the work of people like you, Imtiaz, human rights lawyers such as Dumisa, the spirit of Imam Abdullah Haron is still alive. So thank you very much for your thoughts. And of course, later, after the second address, we would be able to engage with our viewers as well. And just a reminder, I see there are some comments, and I'll go through those comments in a short while. There's also a Q&A panel, a Q&A window right next to the chat function. So you can use the Q&A panel because all the speakers would be able to see that, and we would be able to actually respond to those questions. But we welcome your comments as well. And before I introduce our next speaker, there's a comment, the first one that came from Wisile Sibaka, and he says, "May his," that is Imam Haron's spirit, "live forever, gallant son of the soil of Africa, salute." Fatima Nordin says, "Assalamu alaikum, shukran for this forum." And then Colin Williams says, "May his," that is Imam Haron's legacy, continue. We also have Tandi Olwetu, "May the revolutionary spirit of Imam Haron, Africa should never forget the contribution of this gallant son of man." And then Fauzia Rycliffe says, "Assalamu alaikum, shukran for this. The clip that we played earlier took me back to the 60s and the years before that, having experienced the full force of apartheid." And Tandi Olwetu, incidentally, has reminded us, Tandi is from Tshwane. And then Neville says, "I'm extremely honored to be part of this auspicious occasion and extend my support for our people to further the aspect of justice denied to our people in South Africa, which remains a serious indictment on our holistic international human rights, including the current dispensation under the Constitutional Act 108 of 1996. And that comes from Neville Felix. Thanks, Neville. Faisal Suleiman says, "There are far too many comrades in positions of power and influence who are now in bed with apartheid-era criminals and perpetrators of human rights abuses for any real action to be taken against them." And Ahmed Patel says, "Assalamu alaikum, and to all, not only must the Klerk be charged for crimes against humanity, but what about the rest of the apartheid regime's officials of that time and businesses that benefited from the apartheid regime's state capture?" And then Sadiqa Harun says, "Amin, I was born after Imam Haron, died. He was my father's cousin. My late father's stories made me love him too. They were the generation who fought for this constitution." Sadiqa says, "I'm a lawyer today, and I'm forever inspired to respect and uphold the constitution. How I wish I could have met him too." So a number of other comments, which we will get through. Henny van Wyk actually poses a question, who was responsible for the murder of Molly Blackburn after she had revealed some of the truth of the Craddock Four? And Fatima Nurdin adds, "Build our house of freedom on justice, Aluta continua." And a number of other comments. Of course, if you're following on Zoom, you will be able to go through those comments as well. Advocate slash judge Dumisa Ntsebeza, who was earlier this year appointed actually as a judge of the African Court on Human and People's Rights, represented political prisoners throughout the 1980s and early 1990s. In 1995, he was appointed one of the commissioners in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He's the founder of the South African National Association of Democratic Lawyers and served as its president. He was also president of the South African Black Lawyers Association. Advocate Ntsebeza has represented the Marikana, or the victims or the families of the Marikana, of those striking miners, 36 of the miners who were killed by police at Marikana in August 2012. While still a human rights lawyer based in Mthatha, Advocate Ntsebeza fought to bring forward the truth about the killings of 5 youth aged 12 years to 17 years, killed in their sleep in 1993 under the watch of F.W. de Klerk, the apartheid regime's last president. Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza He's a doctor of laws and also sat as a commissioner, UN commissioner on the Darfur Commission. It's now my pleasure to invite you, Advocate Judge Dumisa Ntsebeza, to address us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you everybody who is here gracing this occasion. I think Lukhanyo has given a detailed history of whom the Imam was, what he stood for, and indeed why it is our duty as those who still live to make sure that the truth will be revealed and that justice will be done. Anyone who hears me speak these words will say, but what about Ntsebeza, who was in the TRC, is now talking about justice? That is why I think we need to contextualize our debate without undermining anything that Lukhanyo has said. South Africa is the only country that I'm aware of where amnesty was available for even the most heinous crimes. I think even the international tribunals, the ICC and related bodies have not sanctioned for certain crimes amnesty. You would not get amnesty for torture. You would not get amnesty for genocidal murders and the related crimes. But we were quite prepared to do so. And this was as a consequence of an arrangement that was a result of a period of negotiations between primarily the African National Congress on the one hand and the Nationalist Party on the other. And I think I need to make that historical context so that we should appreciate what was sought to be achieved, but I will critique why even that was not achieved, principally because there was no political will on the part of those who had agreed on how and in what circumstances amnesty, even for the most heinous crimes, was going to be granted in South Africa. You will know that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came about as a result of a piece of legislation of a post-apartheid national parliament. The Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act. You will know that, or you will see just from that title, there's nothing about truth there. There's nothing about justice. What it sought to do was to promote national unity and reconciliation. But there was an assumption that this was going to happen because those who otherwise should have been condemned as criminals, which they were by all accounts, by all definitions, it was assumed that those who had committed those heinous acts would do the things that the amnesty provisions in the Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act had provided. Amnesty was provided in Section 20. And I think it is important that we should actually understand what that stood for so that we can deal with it critically, because it is something that the ruling class did not honor, even though they had committed themselves to it. Chapter 4 of the Act I have referred to, the Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act 34 of 1995, provided firstly that amnesty would be granted to all those who had committed acts, omissions, or offenses to which the application related. But it would have had to be an act associated with a political motive which was committed in the course of the conflicts of the past. An act with a political motive or objective was defined in the Act as any act or omission which constituted an offense or a delict associated with a political objective, and which was committed within or outside the Republic of South Africa during a specified period. And it would have had to be committed, to have been committed by one, any member or supporter of a publicly known political organization or liberation movement on behalf of or in support of such organization or movement, bona fide in the furtherance of a political struggle waged by such organization or movement against the state. So that's the category under which the liberation movements fell. Or, not or, and who would also be eligible for amnesty? Any employee of the state who, in the course and scope of his or her duties, and within the scope of his or her authority, directed against a publicly known political organization or liberation movement engaged in a political struggle against the state, and which was committed bona fide with the intention of countering the said struggle. These were the criteria that needed to be taken into account in deciding whether an act was one associated with a political objective. The motive of the person who committed the act, the context in which the act took place, the legal and factual nature of the act, including the seriousness of the act, the objective of the act, and whether the act was committed on behalf of the organization or institution of which the person who committed the act was a member. And lastly, the relationship between the act and the political objective pursued, and the proportionality of the act to the objective pursued. Now, those of us who were approached to be in the TRC could not consider that they would be able, because of this amnesty provision, to do the service in the TRC. But some of us persuaded us to go and play our part, if for no other reason but that in the process we would be able to do the investigations and unearth the atrocities that were committed in the mandate period from 1960, which is the year during which Umkhonto weSizwe and UPOKO, the Azanian People's Liberation Army, decided to take up arms against the regime. Because between 1910, when the Union of South Africa became a white man's union, where the majority of the people were not taken into account, from 1910 up to 1960, the liberation movements were sending petitions after petitions to the United Kingdom. But when Sharpeville happened, when Langa happened, even for those who continued to go and send delegations to the United Kingdom because they thought the United Kingdom would take their side against the Nationalist Party regime at that time, realized after the massacre in Sharpeville and the massacre in Kualanga, that there was no other way in which they could continue engaging the enemy or the apartheid regime by peaceful means. That is why 1960 is the period that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission consider to have been a marker of when hostilities began. That is the year when the liberation movements decided they were going to engage in violent means or in all means necessary to bring about change, freedom, and democracy. 1994 became a marker because on the 10th of May in 1994, that became the day on which, for the first time in South Africa, there was an post-apartheid constitutional democracy in which there was a Bill of Rights which guaranteed truth, rights, and freedoms. And it was as a consequence of a compromise agreement between those who had fought for freedom and those who had resisted freedom. it is instructive to pay attention to what was the post-amble of the interim constitution. The post-amble read as follows: this constitution provides a historic bridge between the past of a deeply divided society characterized by strife, by conflict, untold suffering and injustice, and a future founded on the recognition of human rights, democracy, and peaceful coexistence and development opportunities for all South Africans, irrespective of color, race, class, belief, or sex. The pursuit of national unity, the well-being of all South African citizens, and peace require reconciliation between the people of South Africa and the reconstruction of society. The adoption of this constitution lays the secure foundation for the people of South Africa to transcend the divisions and strife of the past, which generated gross violations of human rights, the transgression of humanitarian principles in violent conflicts, and a legacy of hatred, fear, guilt, and revenge. These can now be addressed on the basis that there is a need for understanding, but not for vengeance, a need for reparation, but not for retaliation, a need for Ubuntu, but not for victimization. In order to advance such reconciliation and reconstruction, amnesty shall be granted in respect of acts, omissions, and offenses associated with political objectives and committed in the course of the conflicts of the past. To this end, Parliament, under this constitution, shall adopt a law determining a firm cut-off date, which shall be a date after the 8th of October 1990 and before 6th December 1993, and providing for the mechanisms, criteria, and procedures, including tribunals, if any, through which such amnesty shall be dealt with at any time after the law has been passed. With this constitution and these commitments, we, the people of South Africa, open a new chapter in the history of our country. Oh, Sisikeleli Africa, hot Sian South Africa, Morena Boloka Sichaba Saheso. May God bless our country. Mudzimo Fatotenta Africa, Gusi Katekisa Africa. Now, so soon after this post-amble was attached to the 1993 Constitution, there was 27th of April, 1994, during which, for the first time, the people of this country, like now, decided to go and exercise a vote one person, one vote, something that had not taken place in this country forever and a day. Indeed, by the end of 1995, we had this act, the Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act, and it had an amnesty provision such as I have related to you this evening, in honor of what is in the post emblem. Now, a lot of stories have been said about that post emblem, because in the first place, the post emblem was not even part of the Constitution as such. It was an addition. And it is said that it was a product of a question that was put to the principal negotiators, Cyril Ramaphosa on the one hand, and Rolf Meyer on the other hand, just as they were celebrating the success of the interim constitution. It is claimed that those who were in charge of the instruments of coercion asked, but what is going to happen to us? And that is why there was the post emblem. Because in none of the provisions of the interim constitution do you find the word amnesty. You will find it only in the post emblem. And that led, when the TRC was put up, it led, as you know, to the Azapo litigation, in which the families, the Steve Biko families, the Mklenge families, took the TRC to task and sought to interdict it from continuing to do its work, because they argued, as some today continue to argue, and with justification, a lot of people, in the context of what I will say, saying, what was all this struggle for? Why did the Klerk 4 die in the manner in which they did? The Pepco 3, Batandwa Ndondo, my own cousin, his mother and my mother, sisters. The North Crest 5, about which I will talk about, because those young people were murdered in their sleep. His father was my client, and I will say a little bit about that in the context of de Klerk having admitted that that raid had been carried into Northcrest at his instructions. And what did it result? It resulted into 5 teenagers being murdered in their sleep. Being murdered in their sleep. Did de Klerk apply for amnesty for that event? I'll come to that in a moment. But the context that I am putting up is one where the amnesty provision became a compromise which came after the protracted period of negotiations for a settlement. Not the liberation movement, truth be told, had not won the war. It had not won the armed struggle. But on the other hand, the apartheid regime had come to understand that there was no way, not even in the meting out of the most heinous crimes of violence against an unwilling people, would it succeed in quelling the rebellion that was making the country ungovernable from 1989. In fact, from the 80s into the early 90s. It was a period where not even the strongest army, not even the strongest intelligence services, not even the strongest police force, not even the strongest security police, whatever they did, the time had come for a new society to emerge, and it was not going to be kept from emerging because those who were in the levers of power controlled all the instruments of coercion. But the reality is that they did. When we woke up on the 28th of April, 1994, having voted, and with a very overwhelming majority, I don't think, I think Annabeg, they got the ANC or the democratic forces which constituted an ANC-led government had been swept into power with a majority unimagined before. But when, as I say, we woke up on the 28th of April, 1994, the reality was that the head of the army was still old order. The head of the security police was still old order. The head of the South African police, even if it was now called the police service, was still old order. The head of the intelligence services was still old order. The courts, yes, the courts of law were still majority old order. People who had been in the judiciary quite happy to implement laws that could never be associated with justice, let alone with democracy. But the head of the judiciary at that time was still old order. So that the reality is that with a freedom that the people had acquired through their vote after the 27th of April, 1994, all the instruments of coercion were still in the hands of the oppressor. That was the reality. anyone who would have expected them, in other words, the ANC-led government, to have begun immediately to prosecute those whom the newfound government knew had conducted criminal acts for which there could be no justification, would have to have expected that they would have decided to go and investigate crimes which it turned out had been committed by themselves. And that is why Mohammed CJ, the late Chief Justice, as he then was, confronted with the strength of the arguments of the Bikos, of the Mtlenges, who were saying, how dare you equate our own struggles with the struggles, with the violence of the oppressor, and how dare you want us to forgive and forget. In that Azapo judgment, Mohammed said the following, which was a quotation he took from Mr. Justice Marvin Frankel. In a book that he wrote, Judge Marvin Frankel had said the following, and I quote, "The call to punish human rights criminals can present complex and agonizing problems that have no single or simple solution. While the debate over the Nuremberg trials still goes on, that episode, that is, the trials of war criminals of a defeated nation, I underline, trials of war criminals of a defeated nation, was simplicity itself as compared to the subtle and dangerous issues that can divide a country when it undertakes to punish its own violators. A nation divided during a repressive regime does not emerge suddenly united when the time of repression has passed. The human rights criminals are fellow citizens, living alongside everyone else. And they may be very powerful and dangerous. If the army and the police have been the agencies of terror, the soldiers and the cops aren't going to turn overnight into paragons of respect for human rights. Their numbers and their expert management of deadly weapons remain significant facts of life. The soldiers and the police may be hiding their time, may be biding their time, waiting and conspiring to return to power. They may be seeking to keep or win sympathizers in the population at large, if they are treated too harshly, or if the net of punishment is cast too widely, there may be a backlash that plays into their hands. But their victims cannot simply forgive and forget. These problems are not abstract generalities. They describe tough realities in more than a dozen countries. If, as we hope, more nations are freed from regimes of terror, similar problems will continue to arise. And since the situations vary, the nature of the problems varies from place to place. Now, I want to propose that when there was a compromise in 1993, between 1990 and 1993, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission completed its work and had found evidence, the nature of which the TRC made recommendations for prosecutions in certain crimes that had been committed, and I'll deal with those in a moment. That was the deal. That was the public law or public legal position. And we who were TRC commissioners were prepared to stand by our recommendations for prosecutions. We said those who applied for amnesty, and let's not go into the question now of whether or not they should have been granted amnesty in the first place. That's how we argued. There were certain criteria that had to be met, and those criteria were met. And the law said, even those criminals can literally get away with blue murder. I was still in the TRC when an application for amnesty was made by Askaris who had gone into my home in 1985, taken my cousin, Mathandwa Ndondo, away from home, and within an hour, in broad daylight, he had been shot 9 times. 8 of those bullets, whilst he was, according to a pathologist, in a supine position. He was murdered in broad daylight. The perpetrators applied for amnesty because they made a full disclosure and because they came with a definition of their act to be falling within the provisions of what the amnesty provision provided for. They had seen Bathandwa Ndondo as an enemy of the apartheid state. He was a terrorist. He was smuggling arms from Lesotho into South Africa. And he was a person they could kill with justification in terms of the amnesty provisions. They got amnesty. The person who didn't get amnesty, and I am pursuing that, and I will do so for the rest of my life, was a security policeman who had accompanied those Askaris. He came to the TRC. He told the Amnesty Committee a tissue of lies in an endeavor to save his skin. He was denied amnesty. But, and that was in the early 90s, that man has never been prosecuted. Just like Imtiaz knows that Ahmed did not commit suicide, and he was relentless in making sure that the perpetrators of the murder of Ahmed would be brought to justice. So also am I still determined that those who didn't apply for amnesty, because the chance was there, that policeman, security policeman, who didn't get amnesty because he applied for amnesty, told the Amnesty Committee a tissue of lies. There is no reason why he was not prosecuted. But the big question is, if that is so, why was he not? And we got an answer to that. Those of us who are quite concerned, your Calatas, your Timols, and now your Haruns. They were not prosecuted because there was a lack of political will on the part of the executives. In a probe in which, whilst I was a board member of the Foundation for Human Rights, in which we tried to dig into the reasons why these things happened. Yes, there was a suspension of the criminal justice system in South Africa for a year to give people an opportunity to apply for amnesty. But the clear letter of the law was clear. If you don't apply for amnesty, or if you apply for amnesty and you don't get it because you don't meet those criteria, you didn't meet the criteria for you to be granted amnesty, then you will be prosecuted. And to assist the National Prosecuting Authority or the Department of Justice, when in 1998 we closed shop, we said, here is a list of cases where, because the people were either not prepared to come to the TRC and apply for amnesty, or applied for amnesty and didn't meet the conditions or the criteria for the granting of amnesty, then they must be prosecuted. Now the perpetrators are dying. Nothing is being done. And the big question that needs to be asked is why. But that answer was answered by V.C. Pikoli. It was answered by Ackerman, who was also in the prosecuting authority. Ackerman actually even named the minister by name and said, I was told in so many words, stay away from these TRC related cases. As I close, I need us to be reminded by Terry Bell, with whom we collaborated in the writing of the book, Unfinished Business, South Africa, Apartheid and Truth. You know, the foreword to that book was written in August 2001. And 20 years, it rings as true as it rang 20 years ago. And please allow me to read a little bit of that, because I want to end by saying the question is not really whether or not de Klerk must be prosecuted. The question is, why was he not prosecuted then? Why was he not prosecuted afterwards? And it may well be that what Terry Bell writes here is the answer. And it may well be what we will be debating tonight. Terry Bell in August 2001 writes as follows in the foreword or in the introduction to the book we wrote. There is now, that's 20 years, he says, there is now a strong move to close the door on the past, to pretend that all is not just forgiven, but forgotten. As part of this process, there is an ongoing attempt to draw a bland screen of moral equivalence over South Africa's recent history. This was summed up in 2001 when Cape Town's mayor, Peter Murray, proposed equating a careerist apartheid politician with a principled Democrat. He would do so by renaming two of the city's major intersecting streets after Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk. The proposal amounted to putting on a par a man who had for more than 20 years helped to oversee a political and security apparatus that emotionally, intellectually, and physically crippled millions of people, with a man who had spent 27 years in prison for opposing such practices. The proposal was withdrawn, but only after evidence was presented that alleged elements of the old order had submitted hundreds of fraudulent letters in support of it. This proposal was, however, merely one of the latest and high-profile examples of the rewriting of history. It is a practice that has had an army of collaborators, especially within politics and the media, both in South Africa and abroad. Terry Bell continues. In November 1993, for example, as Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk made their way to Oslo to collect a jointly awarded Nobel Peace Prize, de Klerk was legally implicated in a massacre. There was no outcry. Hardly anyone knew that the last apartheid president had admitted ordering a cross-border attack by a state hit squad that had seen 5 school students shot dead while they slept. Dumisa Ntsebeza was the lawyer supporting the families of the murdered students. And I, Terry Bell, kept in close touch with him at the time. He provided me with all the documentation. De Klerk, on his way to collect the Peace Prize, was cited as a defendant in the Transkei Supreme Court in a civil action for murder brought by the parents of the 5 children who had been killed by the apartheid security forces in their sleep at his admitted behest. It struck me as a dramatic expose. As a journalist, I sent it to newspapers in every capital that de Klerk would be visiting, as well as to local media. It was never published. I was furious. I was enraged. Fergal Kine, the BBC correspondent in South Africa at the time, expressed no surprise. His analysis was simple. Who wants to bugger up a fairy tale? Unquote. Which was what South African story was rapidly turning into. A fairy tale, a myth. Here was the political miracle of so many newspaper headlines. This fairy tale, however, has had the effect of severing the moral moorings of our history. It amounted to the promotion of amnesia, to a denial of the essence of what had gone before. It therefore also amounts to a denial of what exists in the present and what effect this might have on the future. Later, and again without attendant publicity, Mandela intervened and persuaded the families of the murdered students to drop the case and accept an out-of-court settlement. De Klerk ordered the payment of a large sum of state money in compensation, and a convenient blanket of silence fell over the massacre. Those are the details of the North Crest massacre. Who wants to bugger up a fairy tale? As I end, I wish to congratulate the foundation for seeking to make us never to forget. You see, Mahmoud Mamdani, the celebrated Ugandan who was once a professor in humanities at the University of Cape Town, a very good friend of mine, used to say he was a very corrosive critic of the TRC and particularly the amnesty provisions and the extent to which it sought to equate the atrocities of apartheid with those acts that were committed by the liberation movement in resisting the atrocities. He used to say, I can understand the argument about compromising, and I can understand the balance of forces at the time. But you see, in a compromise, you never forget. You never forget that the meaning of compromise is that you accept a position you would otherwise not have accepted until you are in a position to remember that now that you are able to stand up to it, you go back to what you had sought to achieve in the first place. Yes, the liberation movement on the 28th of April 1994 may not have been in a position to bring about change because all the instruments of coercion, including the courts of law, were in the hands of the oppressors. Isn't over 25 years a long enough time for one to remember that if it was a compromise in 1994, because as the saying goes, the balance of forces were not in our favor. What stands in our way now can only be because those who are in the levers of power are either what Lukhanyo was saying, honoring deals that were made at the expense of those who were committed to a revolutionary change in the country, or they don't want to do it. They lack the political will to do so. And if it is the latter, then the question must be, why? Thank you.
Thank you very much to you, Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza. Thank you so much. In-depth account, first-hand experience of dealing with the issues. And I think your closing questions that you have put are, in fact, some that will not only be debated tonight. I think those are questions that need to be answered, and for which particularly the families of the victims of the apartheid atrocities, the perpetrators of crimes against humanity, need to answer for. Thank you so much, Advocate Dumisa, and you would be staying with us. And Lukhanyo, you're still with us, because we have a number of questions. We have lots of comments. We've got too many really to go through, so please do forgive me if I miss out on a few, but I just want to also pass on a message both to you, Advocate Ntsebeza, and to you, Lukhanyo Calata, a message from Shamila Harun Shamiz, the eldest daughter of the late Imam Abdullah Harun and Auntie Khalima Harun. And at this point, we want to also acknowledge Auntie Khalima Harun, who stood for 50 years, a widow, and she was laid to rest. She passed away, in fact, on the 29th of September, on the 50th anniversary of the burial of Imam Haron. Imam Haron was killed in detention on the 27th of September, buried on the 29th. Auntie Khalima Harun passed away on the 29th. Fighting for justice, didn't see the justice that she had been fighting for, but really it is, as one comment puts it, that we really need to serve the legacy of Imam Abdullah Harun and all those who were killed, to actually pursue and continue to pursue, as Imtiaz has done, and as you put it, Advocate, relentlessly pursuing the cause for justice. Before we go into the questions, I want to mention and I want to acknowledge someone, a dear friend, a comrade. Now, this is the 15th year of the Imam Haron Memorial Lectures. The first 13 were held under the auspices of the Imam Abdullah Haron Education Trust, which is still doing sterling work in the field of education, and in so doing keeping alive one of the legacies of Imam Haron, and which was education. Now, it was one of the founding trustees of the Imam Haron Educational Trust, Shams Pather, who was instrumental, partly instrumental in bringing the idea of the lectures to fruition. He proposed this idea of an annual memorial lecture, brought it to fruition, and worked closely in organizing the initial 13 lectures. It was also Shams, to our knowledge, who supported the view that the baton be passed on from the Imam Abdullah Haron Education Trust to the Imam Haron Foundation to continue the series of lectures. Sadly, we lost Shams, a brother, a friend, a mentor, and a comrade earlier this year. The Imam Abdullah Haron Foundation and the Haron family, we salute Shams for his support and service, and we thank his wife, Fawzia, and their children for sharing Shams with us. May the Almighty grant Shams a high place in Jannah in the company of the martyrs. And it was for the cause of the martyr Imam Abdullah Haron that Shams sacrificed so much. So to the family of Shams, to Fawzia and the children, we extend our condolences, but we also remember the work, the sterling work that Shams did. And later I would go through the formal thanks, but let us go into the Q&A panel and a number of questions that have come up. So Fritz Schoon says there was a TRC as opposed to the Nuremberg trials. And this constituted a compromise in itself, according to Fritz. However, by the provisions of the TRC not being stringently enforced, for example, amnesty was granted in more than one case in which full disclosure was glaringly not provided. The TRC became a compromised compromise. Speaking as someone who went before the TRC, that is Fritz Schoon writing, this is what is most frustrating about the TRC process, and it is also now evident that the TRC was a sham. Advocate, could I ask you to just address that very briefly? I think you have to.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I don't. Well, I suppose if we are not in a debate, I am not able to understand in what ways he says it was a sham. I think the place to start at is the Act, the Promotion of National Unity and Reconciliation Act. Now, and the ambitions which the legislators had when they promulgated that act to investigate 34 years of South African history of atrocities, and to do so, or to ask people to do that task in 18 months, and there was a provision for them to add another 6 months, was actually to set them up for failure. And I mean, if I read my own account in this book, Unfinished Business, of how I was critiquing the TRC, I do have to say that it is amazing that we did as much as we did. And as I say, that time came when we had to go and ask for the further 6 months to complete our work, because we realized there is so much. And we left 200 cases for further investigation. And those cases were never touched by the national prosecuting authorities. Now, so the TRC was never set up to be an end in itself. It was never set up also to implement its own recommendations. It was as though the mandate was for us to peep into 34 years of South African history, from 1960 to 1994. See what happened in that period. They give a broad brush against the canvas kind of indication of what we have found, and make the recommendations as to what posterity must do. There needed to have been a follow-up, and if we had an executive arm of government that was true to what they had enacted in Parliament, we probably would be saying something else today. So I mean, I hold no I hold no brief for the TRC, but I don't regret what we did, given the constraints that we had.
Thank you so much to you, Advocate. So really, it's the as you put it, the executive arm of the government, and that leads to the next comment. Really, it comes from Mohammed de Vries. Mohammed de Vries says the atrocities of the apartheid regime should never have been given an opportunity for amnesty. as they committed human rights crimes and were trained by the Zionist Israeli regime. To have given amnesty to these criminals is the biggest mistake the ANC could have made. They really sold us out. So there's a comment from Mohammed De Vries. Tandi Olwetu writes, can we understand the law to be able to produce justice? If so, Judge, what examples can you cite? If not, can justice be achieved for Imam Haron, for the Northcrest massacre victims, for Ahmed Timol and the Klerk 4? So another question to you, but I would like, Lukhanyo, for you to follow up as well. So Judge, if I can ask you to have the first bite at this question posed directly to you. Can we understand the law to be able to produce justice?
Well, there is a saying in law that says the wheels of justice may be grinding slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. I mean, I read the other day about the opening of prosecutions for atrocities that took place in Argentina. And that's about, about 40 years ago. So there will come a time, when those, well, some will die. And the other downside is that people would be witnesses die and they forget, and memories fade. And to the extent that the criminal justice system requires proof and proof beyond a reasonable doubt, some of these crimes may not even be prosecutable. But whoever thought that Ahmed Timol, a case for justice for Ahmed Timol would have come about in the way in which it has come about, Nokuthula Simelane, and 100 others who are going to come.
Oh, thank you to you, Judge Ntsebeza. Lukhanyo, I just want to sort of attach something to that question, sort of, which would be directly addressing what you're working. Do you have hope that there would be justice for the Klerk 4?
Yes, thank you very much. Of course, I have hope. I think if we don't have hope, then we don't really have anything else. And my hope is born out of the fact that when we look at what the Germans were doing as recent as 2019, that they were charging individuals linked to the Holocaust, former Nazis. And I mean, the Second World War took place in the 1940s. So we're talking 75, 80 years ago. The Klerk 4 was only killed in 36 years ago now. There are some people that are linked to the conspiracy to murder the Klerk 4 that are still alive. And those people have, if the NPA were to move, they could charge many of them as soon as next week. Because we, with the help of the Foundation for Human Rights, we've given the NPA everything that they require to make a decision on whether or not they shouldn't prosecute. But it's clear to us that the current head of the NPA, the NDPP, Shamila Batohi, it's not just a criminal matter, that there are political considerations involved in whether or not de Klerk gets charged for his role in the conspiracy to murder the Klerk 4. Because if it was just about the matter of justice, if it was just about the criminal matter, de Klerk would have been charged in 1994 already, when Judge Neville Zitzman, on the 28th of May, just 18 days after former President Nelson Mandela took office as the first democratically elected president of this country, Judge Neville Zitzman found that there were the murders of the Klerk Four could be directly linked to apartheid state operatives, members of the army, members of the police. And that was based on a military signal that was sent to the Secretariat for State Security. And it was based on that military signal that was approved in Tenes around about the 12th of June, where F.W. de Klerk sat in a meeting that the Klerk Four were murdered. So there's enough evidence. And if you take out political considerations, the murderers of the Klerk Four should have been prosecuted a long time ago. Now, unfortunately, I think, and as sad as it is for me, last year, Mrs. Goniwe, Nyamega Goniwe, the wife of Matthew Goniwe, she passed away at the beginning of September last year. She had waited 35 years when she died. Mrs. Haron waited 50 years for justice, and she never saw it when she died. Now, do the people in charge of our government, do they want the same thing to happen to my mother? Do they want the same thing to happen to Mrs. Mhlawuli, to Mrs. Mkhonto? You see, justice is not something that you can outsource. You can't ask some private company to prosecute, to investigate. Justice is a competence of the state. So when the African National Congress stands on a podium and says, vote for us, we want to be your government, it assumes the responsibility of having to serve us, the people, with justice. So justice is a competence, is a direct competence of the state. It cannot be outsourced, like healthcare. So the ANC must give us justice. And yes, justice, it could be delivered by next year, February. We could have or maybe March, let me say, we could have a court in this country that is able to express itself on the guilt or innocence of F.W. de Klerk, of Joffel van der Westhuizen, of Barend du Plessis, of Adrian Vlok, of Craig Williamson, of all of those people who had some role in the murders of the Klerk Four. But we just need, as a Judge Ntsebeza had said, we need the political will to ensure that that justice is delivered. It could be done like that, but we need the people to ensure that it is done. So I remain hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to you, Lukhanyo. I'm going to run through a few of the questions. There are many questions we have to round off now. And it's been a long session, but a very interesting one indeed. So just to, I want to acknowledge the questions that have come in. This one, I think many people have asked this question, Judge, but you can maybe let us know later. Where can we purchase the book Unfinished Business? Now, I'm guilty of having a copy that belongs to someone else, which I should have returned years ago. So I would like to purchase a copy as well. But okay, we'll wait for an answer on that one. I don't know if it's still available, but I think, having read it a couple of times, I think it's really worth re-examining that again. Okay, there's a comment from Shabuddin. Shabuddin Rumani says, simply recounting the sterling work of Imam Haron and not carrying his torch forward is to do his memory an injustice. And so true indeed. And as we said earlier, Mohammed Hussein Abbas says, if our current president is the one that signed away this country, he's obviously referring to him as being one of the chief negotiators, through his involvement with the Codesa negotiations, then we need to investigate such a gross act of misconduct and dishonor. How can the Imam Haron Foundation assist in putting this matter to bed? There is video evidence to corroborate this in the SABC archives. And then it says, may the Imam Haron Foundation be given the honor to free this country from the shackles that democracy has delivered us into. That comes from and then Mohammed Afris, I've answered, or that question has been addressed. Amir Adams has a question. He says, it's a simple one. Why is the process of retributive justice taking so painstakingly long for families like the Haron family as well as others who gave their lives in the struggle? What causes the unnecessary delay? I think in your roundup, Judge, if you can just address that one. You spoke about the wheels of justice grinding along slowly and maybe the question why. And then on Khopotso says, is there a way to reverse the whole TRC as it seems to not have worked for not our history, but to the harshness put to our martyrs? Not only Imam, but Subukwe, Biko, Masamola, Fama, Hani, etc. And how can the NP, that's the National Party, and ANC agreements be scrapped with regard to prosecution of apartheid, or rather, the prosecution of apartheid crimes? Azania seeks justice. And then the final one that I'll handle is from Mohammed Haron. He says, what about those magistrates and prosecutors, as well as others in the health sector professionals? Should they not be posthumously stripped of what they committed during the apartheid era? A number of other questions, and I think we could actually deal with them at a later stage. But just your comments, just to round up, Judge Ntsebeza, and then I'll go over to you, Lukhanyo, because there's a couple of thank yous that we want to do before the radio station leaves us. In case their broadcast does terminate, I just want to thank Radio 786 for joining us as the official community radio broadcaster, and to the listeners of Radio 76, thank you for joining us. So stick with us while the broadcast is on, but I thought I don't want to lose you right in the middle. So thank you to you. Over to you, Judge Ntsebeza.
Yeah, firstly, let me just deal with this question of the book. It's out of print, and Terry and I are looking out into the possibility of getting an e-book published. So we're working on that. And I think in these days of digitization, it might even be more accessible than it is. You see, the question, I think the point of departure is for all of us to say, the TRC was brought about by a democratic parliament, a post-apartheid democratic parliament of a constitutional state. And there was a debate there. I even remember that, you know, there was an introduction in the debate by Dala Omar, and it was clear that everybody had accepted that, you know, there was a, you know, there was a commitment to undo the past, but not to do it in a way in which it would unscramble what had been put together through a negotiated process. I think that some of them genuinely thought something could come out of it. But, you know, conflict it's very difficult. I mean, look at Rwanda, look at Sierra Leone. In fact, in Sierra Leone, in some of my writings, I say sometimes, in fact, in Sierra Leone, they realize that the TRC cannot be the only response to what had happened. The crimes were so heinous, were so out of this world that they decided to get a hybrid. There were crimes which were so heinous that the only way that they could be dealt with would be in a criminal court of law. But then there were others that they felt could be dealt with in the way in which we in South Africa dealt with some of our issues by way of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But I always want to emphasize this. When once a nation commits itself to something, then the nation must do what it has committed itself to. We gave only 1 year, a window of opportunity during which people, however heinous the crimes that they had committed, could come and apply for amnesty. There is no point in saying, hey, we shouldn't have, we should not agree to this amnesty thing. It was there, it was the law for 1 year. After that, there was an opportunity for a post-apartheid democratic society to go after those who had not made a full disclosure, who had not applied for amnesty, who had had no amnesty, because the window period of 1 year had come and gone. Then that is the role of the politicians. In fact, that is the role of the people, we the people. We should have been in the streets in 1998 to say, why is nothing happening? Given that we know that so-and-so was responsible for the murder of Ahmed Timol, the Haron, and all of those things. Why are they now not being prosecuted? So there is as much for society to take their part of the blame as there is, a part for government for not implementing what it had committed to. People, the power of the people is more than the power of those who are in parliament. If that were not so, we would not have had the change that we had in this country. The power of the people. I think we as the communities, derelicted on our duties to hold those who are in the levers of power accountable, and I include myself in that.
Thank you to you, Judge Ntsebeza. And on that note, Lukhanyo, the power of the people. Just as a message, particularly to the family of Imam Abdullah Haron, Auntie Khalima Haron, the children, the families of the Klerk Four, and many others, countless others. How do we, the people, exercise that power?
Thank you so much. It's such a difficult thing, but also quite simple on the other hand, in that if we remember that Imam Abdullah Haron gave the best of himself for us, despite the many dangers, despite the obvious threats to both himself and to his family, he continued to believe in who we are. He gave the best of himself for us. And I say this quite often. So for the Imam and each and every other South African who laid down their life for our freedom, we owe them our very best in return. It is in the pursuit of justice, both social justice and also restorative justice. It is in how we pursue the ideas and the ideals for which they lived and which they died for. And it is in how we remember each and every day that we are where we are today because those that came before us gave their lives for us. They cut the covenant for us, for this freedom. And we owe them everything that we have. We owe them our best to ensure that the society for which they died for, we help realize. And the only way that we can start by doing that is by honoring them at events and on occasions such as this one. But then we wake up tomorrow and then we pursue justice for them. And then we pursue the kinds of societies for which they wanted for us. I think as a message, if we remember why Imam Abdullah Haron died for us, and we do everything that we can to make him proud every day, I think we'll go very, very far in realizing the society that he wanted for us.
Thank you so much, Lukhanyo. Inspiring message, and to Judge Dumisa Ntsebeza. Our thanks to you for joining us tonight, for sharing your thoughts, sharing your ideas, and a number of questions have come up. I see the names here: Warda Williamson, Anwar Adams, etc. What we will do is we are going to compile those questions, and we'll keep the judge and Lukhanyo busy, but no, we'll share it with them. We'll share it with them. Just, you know, there are a couple of people who have someone who said that she's doing research on the North Crest massacre. So I think it, you know, and she would really want to do more work on it. And I think this is an ongoing discussion, and the Imam Haron Foundation, the Academia Library, and Muslim Views, and I represent Muslim Views here tonight. We want to actually continue this, and that will actually, as Lukhanyo have mentioned, and as the judge has said, you know, the people's power. Through these platforms, we can perhaps play our part in bringing justice. I want to close off with thanks, and it's a list, not a very long list, but I'm going to go through some particular names because these are people and organizations that have been involved with the commemoration of the killing, the martyrdom of Imam Abdullah Haron. And the Haron family and the Imam Haron Foundation really wish to thank them for their ongoing support. So we start off with the Qibla movement and Ahmad Qasim in particular, Sheikh Saadullah Khan, Imam Ismail Davids, whose father, the Imam Ibrahim Davids, was a student, one of the close students of Imam Haron. And then we thank Imam Dr. Abdul Rashid Umar and the Claremont Main Road Mosque. We thank Radio 786. Our speakers, of course, we have thanked them. Then the Al-Amin Dhikr Jama, led by Farid Khalant and the students of the former students of Imam Haron from the Al Jamia Mosque in Steegman Road, Claremont. The Al-Ikhlas Academia Library again, and in particularly Dr. Ilyas Parker for facilitating this. Sitting across me, Muhammad Jaffer, Wesley, and you know, his colleagues from on screen. Thank you very much. There's a thanks for Muslim Views, while Muslim Views playing its role as media, and the many people involved in sharing the notices of tonight's meeting, arranging and hosting the interviews. And here we want to thank the Voice of the Cape, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the Muslim Judicial Council for a message of support and also facilitating the message of this particular program going out to their constituents. We want to thank Fauzia van der Voort and Hasnain Abdullah for their input in terms of the publicity material. And from the Imam Haron Foundation and the Haron family, I want to thank someone who works behind the scenes, and Lukhanyo and Judge, you will have had lots of contact with him. He's been pursuing you guys, Qasim Khan, the director of the Imam Haron Foundation. We thank him for putting all of this together. And of course, we thank you, all our participants for joining us tonight via Zoom and via Radio 786. Once again, thank you so much to everyone. Let's keep the spirit of Imam Abdullah Haron alive. We are sitting here. This particular studio is not very far from where Imam Abdullah Haron and Auntie Khalima have been laid to rest. And so we offer our condolences to the families, and we say that Imam Haron and the spirit of Imam Haron will remain alive as we pursue justice for the victims of the crime against humanity, for the victims of the apartheid regime. Thank you very much. Good night. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. I'm learning.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank
you so
Thank
much.
you, Lukhanyo. Right.
Thanks.
Right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, Brady. Fly home safe.
Oh, yes. Yeah, no, I have to.
All right. Traveling mercy, sir.
All right. Excellent,
Right.
Lukhanyo.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Very
Bye.
good debate. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Now you have become